For being here, even though. Thanks everyone for being here, even though we're a small group today. I think we have a very important topic, and I think the crisis of the climate change is become so apparent to many more people this week, and hearing about what Baxter's gonna talk to us about as a place, as a climate receiver place, I think is really important. I think a couple things that I want to do before we turn it over to Baxter is to let the room introduce themselves. So I want to be sure not to forget to do that. And an announcement that I would like to make for everybody's benefit, especially those of you who are here in Syracuse, that I saw in the paper, which I hadn't paid much attention to, was the whole flag selection for the city of Syracuse. And I know as architects and interior designers, symbols and colors, they all make a difference to us all. And the voting, or I guess it's I don't know if that's the first round, but a round of voting ends tomorrow. So if you have any inkling about which of these designs should be selected by the city, I would encourage everyone to go to the website syracuseflag.com /feedback. Okay, so go there, check it out, and you can rank your choices from 1 to 4.
Don, do you know if that's open to anybody or just city residents?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't gone to that website myself. I kind of forgot to go through it. So I don't know what they will ask. My sense, I don't know how they'll control the vote.
I voted, and I think it was just city residents, but I'm not entirely sure.
I'd prove it.
I can't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, anyway, so check it out. Even if you're not a city resident, try to you know, especially if you're in Onondaga County, you're living in you know, in this region, to have your voice registered in terms of what is a appropriate symbol for the city of Syracuse to be displaying, I think is an important thing. Symbols are important, I think, as we all realize. So the next thing, let's just go quickly around. Who's here in the room? We'll start here at the tables.
Hi, I'm Alan. So I've been a salesperson for like the last 30 some odd years, but I used to be a structural nuclear engineer, and this is an area.
I'm Lynn Alec. I started my career as a designer and art director, but I went back to grad school to work on climate change and sustainability. I am a jaded viewer, to be honest with you, but I think it's really important to hear where our younger folks are looking at this. I worked in energy efficiency, but it was very difficult to get work in climate change because, you know, no one's been taking it with the level of seriousness that it needed to be. So I want, you know, you're our future, you're our hope. So that's why I'm here. I'm here with you.
Thank you, Linda. I probably should have introduced myself. Maybe so. I don't know who's online. People know me. My name is John Perspiora. I'm on the board of Greening USA, one of the founding board members. Trained as an engineer, former city engineer and commissioner of water with the city of Syracuse. And the other person, and you who is in the room here is Baxter, but we'll come back to Baxter. Diane, can you ask people around the table in the Zoom room to introduce themselves? Or...
Sure. Well, I could introduce myself. I'm Diane Brandley, and I'm a founding member, and I was a commercial interior designer. The next person we have is Barry Carr. Barry, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barry Carr. I am the Coalition Director for Clean Communities of Central New York. We are designated by the U.S. Department of Energy, one of 75 groups to promote, do education outreach related to clean transportation. And we've been around for 27 years. We are housed within the Center of Excellence. Thanks.
And Barry and I used to be roommates up there.
That's correct. We miss you, Diane.
Yes, well, I miss you too, Barry. Jeffrey Gorney.
Hi, I'm a freelance writer, film curator at Art Rage, and I think of myself as an urban pioneer. I came here direct from a lifetime in New York City about 20 years ago and have been involved in trying to revitalize the city.
Thank you. Alicia Ernest, did you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Alicia Ernest. I represent Focus Greater Syracuse. We are a non-for-profit organization that does focus on citizen engagement, and I have a special place in my heart for Greening USA as I am a New York State Master Naturalist.
Wow, thank you. And we have a special place in our hearts for Focus Greater Syracuse. So thank you. Carol Biesmeyer.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Biesmeyer. I'm a member of Greening USA, and I'm also the vice president of the local chapter of the national group called Wild Ones, and we advocate for native plants in the landscape. I'm very interested in this topic today. I can't wait to hear what our speaker has to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris Carrick.
Hi, folks. I manage the energy program at the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board, and we administer the Climate Smart Communities program here in the region on behalf of DEC, and we're engaged in a number of climate adaptation and resiliency plans in the city of Oneida currently. And very interested in the topic. I'm a Greening USA member and Clean Communities board member. And I'm here with my colleague, Lindsay Spear, who has recently joined us at the planning board. So I'll let her say hello.
Hello, everyone. Lindsay Spear, I'm in the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board now. I'm running the Central New York Regional Clean Energy Hub program, soon to be better known as Energy Smart CNY. And we are basically working on helping people and buildings connect to the green economy, improve their energy efficiency.
Great, thank you. Glenn Allen.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Glenn. By trade, I'm a freelance software developer. I'm also a very passionate cyclist. Let's say I'm a representative of the New York Bicycling Coalition, which is an advocacy group for pedestrians and cyclists. I probably biked about 30,000 miles over the past 10 years, and trying to encourage people to get involved in alternate transportation modes, cycling and busing, and try to get away from the vehicles as much as possible. Also, I'm in improv theater. We have a performance happening at the Gear Factory tomorrow night at 9. Thank you.
Thank you. Howie Hollander.
Hi, I'm Howie, retired engineer from Lockheed Martin, president emeritus of the Technology Alliance of Central New York, TACME, a board member at the most, and basically spend all my retirement time doing STEM outreach and advocacy.
Thank you very much. So I'll do my shameless self-promotion for Greening USA. We've been around since 2003. We are a New York State nonprofit. Not one of us receives a penny for what we do. So thank you to those who are members. Thank you, thank you. And for those who are not members, please consider a membership. 100% of dues goes to supporting paying off our Zoom account and other minor expenses that our organization has. So thanks again for being here, and I'll give it back to John.
Thanks, everyone. I want to give thanks to the one group to allow Green USA to use this room and hosting us today. It's kind of interesting that this one group is a risk management operation, because I think the topic that we're going to hear about today is linked to the whole concept of risk that not only Central New York, but the world is facing. And to lead us in the presentation about climate receiver places is Baxter Hankin. He calls himself an aspiring architect. I think that's because he probably hasn't sat for his exams yet, but he certainly is working as an architect at QPK Design. So I think he probably calls himself an architect, but that's besides the point. He did graduate from Syracuse University School of Architecture in 2020 and the NYU Schack Institute of Real Estate in 2022. He was the founding project manager of Place Initiatives Climate Receiver Places project, inspired to begin work on the topic of climate migration due to Syracuse's ideal location to receive climate refugees. More recently, he has also founded the Syracuse Urbanism Club. I'm interested in hearing more about that, and maybe even to hear more about himself. I'm going to turn it over to Baxter.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Diane, and thanks to everyone who's here at Greening USA, as well as One Group, for letting us use this space. I'm Baxter Hankin. I'm going to be presenting today about climate receiver places. A little bit about me. Most of this was sort of already covered. Place Initiative is the organization that the Climate Receiver Places project is a part of, which is what I'll be talking about today. And then, as was mentioned, I also recently founded the Syracuse Urbanism Club, a local community group here in Syracuse. We have monthly meetings at 6 p.m. on the last Tuesday of every month at McCarthy Mercantile, and we're currently trying to improve one of the city parks downtown. So to jump into my presentation, there's wide variety of impacts of climate change that we have to consider. This photo is one that I took from my family's house in Connecticut, and you can see people kayaking down the street. Climate change has impacts like these, as well as shifts in optimal zones for human habitation. So one thing that we see with climate change is that it's causing a shift, a northward shift in the optimal area for people to live, where, as ProPublica shows in this map, this is currently the optimal zone for human habitation that they've identified. And then as you get further through the century, that zone begins to move further to the north, eventually hitting here in Syracuse, as well as a wide variety of other places across northern North America. Additionally, in addition to those changing zones of human habitation, we have climate risks. And some of these climate risks also identified by ProPublica, and we use some of their data and resources in our project. those risks include extreme heat, high wet bulb temperatures, which is a combination of high humidity and heat that can be deadly, farm crop yield reduction, sea level rise, wildfires, economic damages, water stress, extreme rainfall, and hurricanes is identified by 427. And then there's a wide variety of other natural climate risks: wind, tornadoes, winter storms, extreme cold, disease, toxic algae blooms, volatility of weather, urban flooding, sinkholes, landslides, erosion, and more, such as the wildfire smoke that we just experienced this week. There's also a variety of climate risks that are more about risks to human systems, fiscal insolvency of communities, supply chain collapse, technological collapse, the potential of reaching carrying capacity locally or globally, which is about when a community reaches the capacity of its natural resources to sustain its population. Social and political unrest, conflict, pollution, injustice and equity issues, and more sprawl in resilient places. And I'll get to that a little bit later about why that's important. So we can't just consider the natural risks of climate change, but we also have to look at these as well. And with all of this, it seems like the world's a sinking ship. It seems like it can seem sometimes sort of pessimistic when we look at all of these risks that are facing us from climate change. But in reality, even though we can't stop climate change completely, some of its impacts are already here, are already locked into place with some of the carbon that's in the atmosphere. And additionally, even if we could stop climate change in its tracks, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to, because there's a lot of political and economic systems in play and decision makers that aren't really willing to make the necessary changes. So in addition to trying to stop climate change itself and reduce its impacts to the world, we also have to consider looking at climate migration. And it's not a real solution to climate change, but if we focus on addressing climate migration in the right way, we can improve the lives of a wide variety, a large number of people. To show a few examples of climate migration in present and past. First, we have this excerpt from a New York Times article that shows that climate migration is already happening. When a potentially climate-induced hurricane hit Puerto Rico and displaced a lot of people, thousands of them moved, for example, to the Buffalo area and resettled there because they saw it as a lower risk place in the future of climate change. And climate migration is not just something we're dealing with in the present and the future, but it's also something that has always happened throughout the history of humanity. And one of my favorite examples to look at for this was the ancient Mayans. When the Mayan civilization experienced,
John, you're gonna have to mute your phone.
I don't know how to do that. So
Is it muted? Great. Okay. So when the Mayan civilization experienced a prolonged drought that diverged from their historical climate, they ended up abandoning the southern portion of their civilization, and people began to resettle in the growing northern Mayan cities, where they still were experiencing drought and they still had hardships, but it was more livable there because they had more water resources in the north. And then their civilization continued there for quite a long, extended period of time, while the southern Mayan civilization was entirely wiped out by climate change. And this is a reality that we're facing now and into the future, and we've dealt with it in the past, and we can deal with it again. So now we're going to look at what is a climate receiver place. Climate receiver places, these are communities with lower climate-related risk, well situated to receive climate migrants in terms of geography and urban form. And there's a variety of different types of places associated with climate change and climate migration. We have receiver places, which we'll be talking about today. Then there's also intermediate receiver places, places that may receive a lot of climate migrants and refugees now, and may be well situated in the short term or medium term, but in the long term may not be ideal places for people to live in the long term, right? And then you have neutral places, places where you will experience both inward and outward migration, where it'll probably lead to a fairly stable population. And those kind of places will experience a lot of the problems caused by climate change, but they will be slightly better off than sending places, which will become almost completely or entirely uninhabitable, and where pretty much everyone at some point or another will be forced to leave for receiver places and these other types of places. So the backstory of how I got interested in the topic of climate migration and climate receiver places starts when I was a student at Syracuse University. So when I was here, I noticed that Syracuse was really well situated to avoid some of the worst impacts of climate change. We're still going to see a lot of climate risks, but it'll be better, most likely, than most other places. And Syracuse is a city with a fairly compact urban form at its center, but that urban form has been hollowing out for many decades now. And as that has been happening, and as the population of the county has remained relatively stagnant over the course of about 70 years, what we've seen is the hollowing out of the city is leading to expansion in the suburbs around the city. Urban sprawl, building of suburbs in what was once farmland or natural lands. And my interest in this topic began here. My concern that if this is happening at such a rapid rate, destroying the natural and farmlands of the region, which are an incredible resource, both economically and ecologically, then when we start receiving larger numbers of climate migrants and climate refugees, if we don't have the proper planning in place before then, we will see a vast explosion of building of new suburbs over this land that once we build them, we can't really reclaim this great resource that our region has. And I noticed the same pattern was happening in a lot of other communities, and realized that what I needed to do was put a group together to bring these issues to light, to create a toolkit to help communities plan for the future and avoid this fate when growth occurs in places like Syracuse due to climate change. So some of the key questions of the Climate Receiver Places project, the project that I started around this issue, include: as the world changes, it becomes less hospitable, where will people go? How will receiving places manage the growth? How will places provide the necessary jobs and services? How will well-situated places remain viable and resilient? And I try to look at this with hope and optimism. This can be a very depressing topic when you look at climate change in terms of climate migration. You're sort of accepting the reality that there will have to be some climate migration, that there will be a certain level of damage to the environment and to human systems. But I look at it from hope and with hope and an optimistic perspective, because this project that we've begun and this work around climate migration is an opportunity to create livable communities and high quality of life for as many people as possible if we manage this whole process correctly. So this is the first step we took in creating the Climate Receiver Places project. We started mapping. We were trying to identify where are the climate receiver places, which places have relatively lower risk when it comes to climate change. On this map, the darker areas are the places that we identified with lower risk based on a variety of different weighted risks, looking at water stress, sea level rise, wildfires, heat, wet bulb temperatures, farm yields, extreme rainfall and flooding, hurricanes, and economic damages. And then we set a threshold for what level of risk counts as a climate receiver place and what doesn't. And you'll see the blue area here is what we've identified as regions that could potentially contain climate receiver places. And the green areas we've identified as places that are kind of borderline. Maybe they're climate receiver places, maybe they're not. From there, we zoomed further in on the map. We zoomed into individual towns, villages, cities, and other communities. And we were looking at urban form. We only considered places that had high quality urban form with high urbanist growth potential, communities that are compact, walkable, potentially transit oriented, communities that use land more efficiently and effectively without spreading people out over too much space, which would waste resources of land, natural lands and farmlands. And so as we identified these communities, we also then further looked at other more local factors, such as urban flooding that wasn't picked up in the county level data, and we further narrowed down our list of places. And this was the final map that we came to, where we identified specific towns, cities, villages, and other communities that could potentially be climate receiver places. You'll see on the map that Syracuse is one of those places, but there's thousands of others of various sizes, ranging from a few dozen people up to almost 1 million. And to give you an idea of what some of these communities other than Syracuse look like, we looked at certain big cities that might be climate receiver places, such as Detroit and Charlotte. We also looked at small towns such as Bonifay and Shenandoah. And then there's some mid-sized towns and cities as well in our list, such as Duluth and Burlington. And now that we identified these communities, now we had to figure out, how do we manage the future for these receiver places? What do we want that to look like? And we identified certain qualities that we believe that climate receiver places should have. They should be capable, they should be resilient, they should be thriving, urbanist, specific, and exemplary. And I can go a bit into what each of those mean to place initiatives. So capable is a lot of that is, it's more than just this, but a lot of it is about carrying capacity. It's about maximizing the capacity of a place to exist sustainably for the largest number of people as possible without a resource crisis occurring. So that means managing land and resources and people and government processes and everything in the community very effectively and sustainably. And then we have resilient. Resilient means a lot of things, but the quality of resilience includes fiscal solvency. And this map here is from a consulting group called Urban 3. And what this map essentially shows is looking at the balance of infrastructure costs versus tax revenue in different parts of the city. I can't remember which city this was, but what they found is that denser, walkable, transit-oriented parts of the city, even if they were, even if the real estate values happened to be suppressed, tended to pay for themselves in terms of tax revenue. The tax revenue coming in was able to pay for infrastructure maintenance in those parts of cities, whereas once you get to the more suburban sprawling more spread out areas of a community, you have more miles of infrastructure per capita, to the point where even if those parts of the community are quite wealthy, they end up being subsidized by the denser parts of the city when it comes to tax revenue. So in terms of resilience, it's very important to organize the city in a way that that uses tax revenue effectively, that can pay for itself, that doesn't create too much of an infrastructure maintenance burden, so that when the shocks of climate change occur, these communities have the funds to be able to respond. Additionally, we believe climate receiver places should be thriving. And when we say thriving, thriving means for everyone. If a part of the community seems to be thriving, but another part isn't, that's not what we're referring to. We hope for the successful outcomes of climate receiver places to be equitable in this way. Urbanist, as I mentioned before, under resilience, we believe strongly in walkable, dense, compact, transit-oriented urban communities that save land and resources, provide the option for people to move around the city in multiple ways, whether that's by foot, bike, transit, car, or other means. Being urbanist is really both about creating access and community for the people who live there, no matter the amount of resources they have at their disposal, as well as using land effectively, as I've spoken about. And then specific. Every community is unique. Every climate receiver place needs a different approach. We don't want to create a one-size-fits-all solution. We believe that this work should be customized to every community. For example, up here you see an image of Saratoga Springs side by side with an image of Syracuse. And these two communities, both climate receiver places, both in upstate New York. One is a small community that's a tourist destination that's fairly wealthy, and another is a large or a mid-sized city that's that has struggled for a number of years, and these two communities are going to require wildly different approaches to the future. Exemplary. We believe climate receiver places should be exemplary, acting now, setting an example for other places, not waiting for another community to take the lead and be the first to create meaningful action on this issue. Beyond those qualities that we've identified for climate receiver places, we believe those qualities should each be cross-referenced with certain areas of focus. Those areas of focus include equity, affordability, and access, regional focus and partnerships, resilient infrastructure, good governance, high-quality built form, connected communities, resilient economies, environmental sustainability, and hazard risk reduction of climate risk factors that, even though a specific climate receiver place may have relatively low climate risk, they will still have some to deal with. Now looking into each of those areas of focus, first we have equity, affordability, and access. Communities should work for everyone, whether that's extant residents, incoming residents, outgoing residents, or residents remaining in place. This applies to climate receiver places and all of the other three types of communities relating to climate migration that I mentioned. Then we have regional focus and partnerships, where urban places impact their surroundings, rural systems impact urban places. And for a municipality to become a climate receiver place, they have to have a good working relationship and shared goals and collaboration with the region around them to really be fully successful. Resilient infrastructure, it should be multifunctional and low maintenance. Here's an example of a park in Stamford, Connecticut that was designed to help manage urban flooding. It's low maintenance, it's multifunctional, it acts as resilient infrastructure as well as a community space. And therefore, by combining multiple purposes and low cost, it can really improve the city's infrastructure. If they think about infrastructure in this way at a larger scale across major systems. Good governance, it's incredibly important with the volatility and unpredictable nature of climate risks that communities restructure their governance processes to be timely, responsive, and forward-looking. Additionally, I've already spoken about high quality built form in terms of sustainable land use, community, and quality of life that comes from compact, walkable urban communities set within natural and farmland landscape. The next is connected communities, where it's important to look at climate receiver places from the social component, looking at access to education, opportunity, communication, inclusivity, culture, and really taking the approach that this has to be addressed not only for climate migrants coming into a community, but also the people who already live there, especially in disadvantaged communities, making sure that there's a balance between accommodating the disadvantaged communities that are already in a city like Syracuse versus those who are coming here displaced from elsewhere. Resilient economies, looking at local fine-grained economies, fine-grained, meaning if two economies are the same size, but one of them is made up of a smaller number of big businesses, whereas the other fine-grained one is made up of a larger number of small businesses, the fine-grained economy will be more resilient to shocks. And looking at shared opportunity as well for both exit and new residents of the community. And then also preparing the economy for the future before the growth occurs, making sure that that works for everyone. Environmental sustainability, looking at carbon emissions and local impacts, but also looking at both passive and active systems. So you have active systems that a lot of people in the climate space are very focused on right now, such as technological systems, solar panels, electric cars, things like that are an important part of the picture. But when we look at passive systems, those are equally as important in fighting climate change and contributing to environmental sustainability. As I've spoken about a couple of times in this presentation, when you have compact, walkable urban communities, as opposed to spread out suburban communities, you have lower carbon emissions from transportation when fewer people are driving, and you also have a lower impact on the land because the space that people are living in is taking up less land that could be natural lands and farmlands. And these passive and active systems need to coexist in order to create true environmental sustainability for a community. And then looking at hazard risk reduction, nowhere can completely escape the impacts of climate change. As we saw this week, even though Syracuse is a great potential climate receiver place, we saw wildfire smoke this week that was hazardous. In the few weeks prior to that, we've had very little rainfall. And these are things that communities will have to prepare for, even if they're much better off than most places in the world when it comes to this future. So all of this work is part of the Climate Receiver Places Project Place Initiative. And Place Initiative is a policy platform that operates in the intersection between climate change, social justice, and urbanism. And Place Initiative is a group that was founded about 2 years ago, sort of out of members of the Congress for the New Urbanism Currently the Climate Receiver Places project is the flagship project of Place Initiative. So this project, the Climate Receiver Places project, is for creating new life and opportunity in legacy places, creating opportunity and safe havens for extant and incoming residents, and creating sustainability and measurable tools to ensure great places for all. We're looking to create change through building resilience and sustainability, incorporating diverse perspectives and all community members in the process, and building coalitions, working on advocacy, education, and partnerships. Our strategy is nothing radical. What we're really doing here is aggregating ideas about what makes communities sustainable and resilient. All of these ideas already exist in other contexts, and we've taken them, brought them together, and reframed them in the context of how important this is in a future of incoming climate migration. And then the other part of our strategy is identifying and assessing climate receiver places in a way that incentivizes timely local implementation of sustainable urbanism. So the idea about that is that if we show communities that they have a particularly compelling and timely reason, which is climate migration and being a receiver place, for them to finally act now and make change now when it comes to resilience and quality urbanism. We hope that this will help spur that change, this framing of the issues. The project goals were to create a toolkit for better local and regional governance, as well as to help communities implement the toolkit and our guiding principles. And the audience of the project is mostly local and regional, although it can extend beyond that. We're looking at working with local and regional government stakeholders and organizers. We created a series of 4 main documents for the project. We have a project summary document, receiving geography guide, community principles guide, and assessment guide. So the project summary is exactly what it sounds like. It's a summary of the project plus a set of next steps for how communities can implement the Climate Receiver Places project locally. So this shows some of the next steps. Stage 1, connect and prepare, including team building, information gathering, and assessment. Stage 2, plan and advocate, including capacity building, planning, and education. And stage 3, implement and adjust, including making change, measuring outcomes, and sharing and adjusting the implementation based on those measured outcomes. Our next project document was the receiving geography guide. This is the first document we produced. And this one contains the maps that I showed earlier and the methodology for how we created the maps, identifying where are the climate receiver places. The next document of our project, the central focus of the project, is the community principles guide, which includes our goals, principles, and next steps. The goals being the qualities that I referred to earlier in my presentation, and the principles being the areas of focus that I spoke about as well. The next steps being the same next steps that I just went through that are also within the project summary document. And this is an example of what some of the community principles guide looks like. It's a very in-depth document that we had an incredible team that worked together to produce this and edit it over time. It's about 100 pages, and it goes through a wide variety of different issues that a community should consider structured within the areas of focus I spoke about earlier. And it's not prescriptive in terms of solutions so much as it is trying to raise all of the right nuanced questions to consider that may not have been considered. And then the final document, we just released this within the last couple of weeks is the Community Assessment Guide. And this is an interactive tool for creating local change. Here's an example of what the Community Assessment Guide looks like. We've taken the structure of the document, the Community Principles Guide, and we've reorganized it into a spreadsheet where you have drop-down menus and check boxes and areas to insert comments. And how you can use this document is on the various topics of the Community Principles Guide. You can score yourself based on some criteria we've set up in the instructions of this assessment guide, and then you can also write comments to add a qualitative approach to the more quantitative structure of the guide. And as you check these check boxes and click these drop-down menus, it will automatically update a series of bar graphs and letter grade scores and percentage-based scores, etc. It's a great tool to really figure out what next steps to take based on the very lengthy Community Principles Guide and our other documents, because it can help places identify which areas are currently not receiving enough attention in a community, or which areas are lacking a little bit in implementation, and then can help them identify some next steps to address those problems to help them on a better track towards greater resilience. So our next steps within PLACE initiative, now that we identified the principles for climate receiver places and built a series of guide documents, we plan to use our funding to better establish PLACE as an organization. We just published the assessment guide since I put these slides together, so that's why it says that still. We next are looking to spread awareness about this issue and about this project and our resources. We also want to collaborate with communities to create the first local implementations of our work in pilot projects in some of the communities that we've identified, and collaborate with all of you as well. So if you're interested in the Climate Receiver Places project at PLACE Initiative, you can scan this QR code or visit our website at placeinitiative.org/receiver-places/. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open it up to some questions from our audience, I'm gonna assume the moderator's prerogative to make a comment and just ask one question myself to get us started. But congratulations. It seems like you've taken something that Green USA worked on 20 years ago with the 12 traits of a sustainable community, but applied it in a more specific and expansive manner. So I think that's a great work, and I think you developed a terrific planning tool for the time that we're in. So I just want to say congratulations. Can you just explain, and maybe I missed it at the beginning of the meeting, who is we, the PLACE initiative, your co-workers on this project, and about your funding and how how this whole thing works.
Yeah, I can speak about PLACE initiative for a moment. So we are a group that came together out of Congress for the New Urbanism about 2 years ago. A group of people from all over the country, as well as some members of Canada too. There's a lot of architects and planners and people from other professions as well. We meet online since we're really all over the map in terms of our locations. And we also, in terms of our funding, we operated for a while as entirely volunteer-based. Currently, we have a part-time paid executive director. Our current funding comes from a group called the Tecovas Foundation. We have additional funding sources in the pipeline too. So we're just getting started, last week I wasn't able to make it, but Place Initiative hosted a series of events at this year's conference for the Congress for the New Urbanism in Charlotte, and brought together some local community stakeholders, as well as members of the Place Initiative team and others, to discuss the issues of this project and how they related to the host city of that conference. So that was really exciting to see some of those local partnerships potentially forming there.
Wow, thank you very much for that answer. So Diane, I was having trouble seeing the chat, and that's why I interrupted the meeting with my bumbled way of trying to log on myself to the Zoom so I could see the chat and keep my eye on it. But if there are any questions in the chat, or I think I probably also can see people if they raise their hands online. Are there any questions in the room before we try to entertain questions from here? Now I see something here. It says you have been signed out because you are currently signed in. Okay.
Did we?
I have no idea what I don't know what that means. Can you hear me, Diane?
I can hear you, and there are
Okay, great. We're good.
the questions in the chat have not really shown up yet. We had a comment from Glenn Allen about who's going to get here first, Micron folks or climate migrants. The Micron project is certainly a whole separate issue.
So that's a really interesting topic. So there's multiple types of climate migrants, and some people are migrants by choice, and some people are refugees or displaced. Some of the people coming here will have resources, and some will be very resource scarce. And it's important to really balance the needs of all of those groups, and especially focus on a lot of people who are more disadvantaged in terms of their resources. So I think a lot of it is going to happen all at once. It's not necessarily one first before the other. And Micron may get here before a lot of the massive numbers of climate refugees start pouring in. But Syracuse is already receiving people from places that have higher climate risk, and especially high heat already, who are migrating here by choice to escape some of the worst impacts of climate change before they really get worse. I was recently at Open Studios at the Gear Factory, and speaking to a lot of artists who were not originally from Syracuse. A lot of them moved here recently, and part of the reason for picking Syracuse to move to was because of climate risks. A lot of them were coming from southern states or southern regions where the heat has just become too unbearable. And one other thing I wanted to mention before we get into any potential questions is John is correct. Greening USA's 12 Traits was one of the sources of inspiration for this project, as we wanted to take the idea of a system for assessing the sustainability of communities and bring that into the context specifically of climate migration in climate receiver places. And at the end of the community principles guide that we produced. We have a number of outside organizations and resources that we reference there, and we reference Greening USA for the amazing work that this group has already done on things like the 12 traits.
Wow, thank you, Baxter. That's awesome. We have a question from Carol Biesmeyer. Carol, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, let me get my camera on. Thank you, Baxter. That was a fascinating presentation. And it's wonderful that Syracuse is one of the receiver places. But I was struck by the maps that you showed and the huge area of the country that are not receiver places, that are, have a lot of people in them now, huge cities, etc. And I wonder how you're going to address communities who aren't considered receiver places when they ask for your help, or especially money, especially federal money. What's going to happen to these places that just have such huge investments now that are going to be uninhabitable? Have you thought about that? Can you?
Yes, yes, we've thought about that. It's a very tricky topic. The work that we did by putting together these maps has been incredibly divisive in a lot of ways, because there's people who are from places where they think that they'll be fine from climate change, and the data and how we've looked at it and put it together suggests that that may or may not be true. The maps that we've put together are speculative, they're uncertain, they're not precise. So this is really our best guess at where the climate receiver places in the lower 48 states are probably going to be. But it's not really an authoritative source of information. It's more about how can our group in place initiative narrow the scope of our project so that we really understand which communities we want to reach out to and try to partner with, where to narrow our focus as an organization with limited resources, and also as sort of a tool to push communities on our list to act with a little bit more urgency when it comes to resilience. However, we do mention in our resources that we've produced that this map, all of these maps and our list of places and how we're looking at these climate risks is not necessarily 100% accurate. And we say there may be plenty of other communities that are not on our list that could be great climate receiver places. And additionally, between the places that are going to become completely uninhabitable and the climate receiver places, there's other types of communities. There's the intermediate receiver places, which we've tried to identify some of the better climate receiver places, the better situated ones. But there will be some places in between that still have fairly high climate risk, but they're a lot better than most other places, and they're still going to receive climate refugees from a lot of the worst impacted places in the world. And those kind of places need a lot of focus as well from efforts that we promote with this project. When it comes to, I could say sort of the same thing about the neutral places I talked about earlier. When it comes to the sending places, the places that are probably the worst situated to deal with climate change, it's not really within the scope of our project, but we talk about this a bit, where we really hope that other groups have the capacity to step up and work with those communities on a managed retreat. How can you make retreat from a community that has a very very difficult future with its climate risks? How do you make that that retreat as human, as equitable as possible?
North Carolina.
And when it comes to identifying these places as well, we we would love for every place to be a climate receiver place. And we try to look at this analysis in an objective way by picking a way to analyze the data that we decided to use that's very consistent, not inject our own biases into the map, and accept the reality that as much as we would love more places to be resilient and viable into the future, that just may not be possible.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Baxter, and thanks, Carol. Chris Carrick has several questions. Chris, did you want to ask your questions?
Sure. It's a little bit in the weeds, but I was curious just if you could talk more about the creation of the rating system and how the scores were developed. I guess I see that I opened up the receiving geography guide and saw that mostly the ProPublica scores were sort of relied on. There's a reference here to 427, which I'm not really familiar with, so maybe you can comment on that. And also, did you use the EPA's Climate Resiliency Screening Index at all as a resource? Because that uses an interesting approach that might be consistent or add some more perspective.
Yeah, so I could speak to that a little bit, right? We do look at two different sources for climate risks. We look at ProPublica, as you mentioned, but we felt that ProPublica did not consider a large enough range of different types of climate risks in their analysis. So then we turned to 427, which is it's a subsidiary of Moody's that looks at climate risk in varying geographies. I believe their intent is to help businesses decide where to locate from a risk standpoint. And so we used data from both of those sources. And in terms of some of the EPA tools, there's a lot of there's some great government tools that have done similar things as this map that have come out very recently. When we created this map, or the first version of it, I believe it was over a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. A lot of those resources that exist now didn't exist yet, or didn't exist in their current form. So we sort of had to start a little bit more from scratch than if we had started this mapping process today. But a lot of these different tools use a lot of very similar data.
Thanks for that.
All right, we also have a question from Glenn Allen. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. All right, hey Baxter, good job. All right, so my question was, can we learn from, prior migrations? So during your talk, I couldn't help but think about the Grapes of Wrath and the Dust Bowl and how the Joad family migrated to California, and it didn't work, the Joads and everyone else, and it didn't really work so well. And then after thinking about it further, like how do we get existing populations to be more inviting versus adversarial? And you can see this now with the current migrant crisis, that existing population is concerned with, and with good reason, like how these new folks are going to impact our lives. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's a big challenge. I don't think I or anyone else has all the answers to that, but one thing that I do think is very important is being proactive with planning and preparing for this incoming surge of growth. Syracuse and a lot of other cities on this list probably the majority of places on this list have not seen much or any growth in a number of decades. The way that they and their systems are currently set up does not really accommodate or prepare for any growth because they're not expecting any and they're not used to any. So in order for a community like Syracuse to be more welcoming towards people who are displaced from climate change, we need to have the proper systems ready to go to support those people. And one of those is housing. We currently have a refugee crisis where people were turned away from Onondaga County because part of the reason was they were unable to find the right housing for these people on short notice without displacing other people from a extended stay hotel as far as I'm aware with the issue. And making sure that housing and other systems to support people are already in place can help address concerns people might have if those incoming residents are absorbed into the community a little bit more seamlessly because of that preparation. Can you repeat the other part of your question?
I think, well, the first part, I was just wondering if you folks have studied like the history of other climate migrations. And so, for example, like the Dust Bowl, yeah, California was not prepared, and it was a big mess back then, when I think in the 30s or 40s. Yeah, any research on past migrations?
Yeah, so research on past migrations. I think that we haven't done a super extensive amount of research into the process of getting people from one place to another, making sure the migration process itself goes smoothly. The project is mostly focused on what happens at the receiving end. It's really about what does a city like Syracuse do to prepare for it, accommodate the growth, and accept these migrants and refugees on the end of their journey. But the migration process, other parts of the migration process, such as people leaving one place and picking up and moving to another, is beyond the scope of our work slightly, but that would certainly be interesting for us to do more research into things like the Dust Bowl.
I have a question. So as John mentioned, there's a lot of similarities to the Greening USA's 12 traits of sustainable communities, and we've already been working hard to try and get local government on board to take a look at that. So trait number one is government leadership, and it's probably trait number one for a really good reason, because in order to achieve this, we need government leadership. Does your organization have a plan for government outreach?
We are currently working on that. So for a while with this project, we were really in the mode of let's produce all of the documents so we have a complete set of resources to approach communities with. And now that we just published the community assessment guide within the last couple of weeks, now our goal is to develop that plan for how to work with communities, how to focus on outreach. We had a couple of communities that we almost started a project with before our set of resources was complete, but those kind of fell through because we didn't have a complete enough set of tools yet. But one point that was brought up by a member of the team that we briefly were trying to work with in Flint, Michigan, was that they've been trying to create greater resilience, create better quality urbanism, and a lot of these other important issues, they've been trying to address them for a number of years. But now that we're framing this as urgent because they're suddenly probably going to see some growth due to climate change, while also seeing a lot of the risks of climate change, that sense of urgency was giving them hope that that they would be able to create some real action. So we're probably going to, in our strategy, try to focus on that aspect of the project.
Just as a follow-up, there is an international organization called ICLEI, ICLEI, and they have a community rating system. Has your organization looked into that one?
We have looked into that. I am familiar with them. We reference that organization in the citations at the end of our documents as well. I can't remember at the moment what the conclusion of our research into that group was.
Linda has a question in the room.
Baxter, thank you. It was an excellent presentation, and I really applaud all of the aspects you were trying to cover to be implemented here. I think that's deeply important. What I didn't add when I was introducing myself, I've also been a community organizer on racial and social justice. So my question really revolves around education, because what I have found, and I think many people have found, when you are dealing with, vital day-to-day issues, it's very hard to get people who need food to think about not even just climate, but maybe even housing if they're housed or if you're unhoused, and so to sort of bring that all together is a big job that I'm sure you know, and I feel like overlapping with governance, right? If we do have a representative democracy that's working, I don't believe we have right now, it should be the people pushing, right, the leadership to do these kinds of things. So I don't know if you have best practices on certain areas. I presume most of this has to happen on a local level, because I'm not expecting the federal government to be supporting this. But financially, that's tough, right? I live in Syracuse, so I just heard yesterday that there's a deficit, right, in the budget, whatever that happened. And it's very hard to tell people, oh, we already got this extra tax, which I'm happy to pay, but it's like, how much can certain areas be pushed for this? So I feel like you have to understand it in order to say, yes, I'm willing to do this. And I guess I feel like that might be your biggest hurdle, is to really get people to understand the importance, not only in the moment, but in the future, and for your children, right? For all those that follow. I don't know what you've looked at. I don't know if you have good examples of that. That's what I do on, like, how do we do a better job educating the population?
Right, so that's a really good question. That's one we've been struggling with a little bit. As we were focusing on producing these documents for a while, we were trying to consider that in how we framed the issues in our documents, but ultimately, now that we have this set of resources that's out there, with the community assessment guide finally published very recently, that's one of our next steps. We're trying to focus on the strategy of how do we work with communities, how do we get them interested, how do we get the people in the communities interested in understanding these complex issues. So it's not something that we've figured out yet, but it's our next step in the process. In terms of funding, local funding is very challenging. There are opportunities for state and federal funding, particularly there's now funding out there for climate resilience, disaster resilience, more funding. I've been told by some of the experts in funding who are part of our group, more funding than people know what to do with. So if we can figure out how to, if we can partner with the community and put together a good grant application, there may be great resources for funding out there. I don't know how permanent those will be, but we're in a unique position if we can get to the point where we're ready to do that. So yeah, I'm much more concerned with getting communities interested in working with us rather than the funding itself.
Thank you.
I think one of the biggest problems that we're probably gonna face here is the way things happen in this country is that we want to like let the private sector take the lead because, you know, capitalism reigns supreme. And I could see that is a potential problem with these things in terms of creating additional inequality in different communities, because certainly businesses will build new housing, but it's gonna be higher end and it's gonna raise the prices for everybody else. So I think the government has an important role to play in this whole process to help see it done in an equitable manner.
Absolutely, and I think when you touch upon some of the governance issues in this country, even though the maps we've created and the data that we've based those maps on are focused on the lower 48 states of the US, this project can be implemented in any climate receiver place in the world. And we have members in of our organization in Canada as well who are interested. So who knows, maybe our first project will be in the US, maybe it'll be in Canada, maybe it'll be somewhere else. Wherever we need to go within the geography of climate receiver places to get started.
Thanks, Baxter. Diana, there are no other comments or questions online. I think we're close to the end of our time anyways. A great presentation. It's great to see the kind of things that Greening USA put in motion with the 12 traits progressing to the kind of level that Baxter and his place group have taken it. And thanks for being here with us today. It's exactly what we intended with Green Bag Lunches, to bring in people who are doing work in the field, hear what they're doing, and create the dialogue to help keep it going. So thank you all very much for being with us today. I think we're at the end of our time. Another round of applause.